And without being in there with the battle scars, it's really different to understand that, the founder who got you to 10 million turnover, he's the exact or she's the exact bottleneck that's going to stop you getting to 50.
Welcome to the Scalability Code, the podcast that helps you get out of the shit show and start growing your business. And now for your host, Matt Haney.
Here we are, another episode of Scalability Code. Today we've got Christopher Burke with us. Christopher, thanks for joining us today. I did learn in the pre-meeting that Christopher is an Aussie living in London, which completely threw off the whole accent to me because I was like, he sounds like an Aussie, but he lives in London. Am I going to offend him by saying he's an Aussie or a Brit? And I haven't offended him yet. So Christopher, thanks for joining us today on the Scalability Code.
Great to meet you, Matt, and thanks for having me on.
Awesome. So here's what we do. Every time I introduce myself to someone, I feel like I have to rush through the intro. I have to get straight to what we're talking about. No one wants to hear about me. And that's kind of the opposite today. Today, I'm interviewing you. You get to tell us about your journey. So what I like to do first is learn about how you became an entrepreneur. That can be all the way back to when you were a young kid or recently, whatever. And then as that, maybe there's someone that influenced you as an entrepreneur or that was your first glimpse into entrepreneurship. So those two questions I'd love to have answers to.
Yeah, that's a great question. Thanks very much. So my father was a great eccentric and entrepreneur. He was very much a gentleman. He ran pubs and frozen fish business. And at one stage, he was a bookmaker as well and loved the horse racing and all cash businesses, which he sort of loved to do. He was very kind, maybe a bit too kind for some of the businesses he got into and honest, but he was always sort of looking for new ways and new, endeavors to make money and to help people.
Awesome. So he's the one that taught you about entrepreneurship or that exposed it to you, I should say.
Yeah, I mean, he was always like, you don't want to get a job. You want to sort of have the freedom, go out there and start your own business, find your own way, put your own stamp on something, which has been amazing. Amazing to sort of watch him in different businesses along the way.
That's awesome. And is he still in Oz?
Unfortunately, he passed away 14 years ago. Okay. But I'd say he lived his best life right up until the end of his days.
There's something to be said about that. As my close friend says, you got to get busy living. Got to get busy living.
Exactly.
Well, okay, awesome. Tell me about your entrepreneurial journey and give me a little bit of kind of where you came from and hit along some things, and then we'll get to your current world today.
So look, I've spent the last 25 years in London building businesses. I haven't been studying them or advising them. I've been actually inside building them from inside the machine. So the first business or the first major business I had was called Brickenden, which serves the largest banks in the world, the JP Morgans, the Citibanks, the UBSs. We sort of do the kind of complex programs that can't fail, credit systems, regulatory systems, or rescue projects that have gone off track. And I did that for 16 years. And that generated $250 million of sales in that time.
Wow.
With no funding. Second business I launched was in 2018, which was called Hybrid Hero, and it's a workplace management system. And again, learning a very different business. That's a software business and a product, where the other one was all about the service. And it's live in 40 countries, 11 languages, has clients like Dyson, BMW, Pepsi. And we launched it 2 years before COVID, and then COVID validated the thesis about needing to understand remote working, hybrid working, all those different things. So I'm pretty proud of that. So yeah, that's I guess the start of my entrepreneurial journey. They're the two big chunks that I've sort of had along the way.
That's awesome. And those got you to where you are today and the businesses that you run and operate today.
Yeah, I think they sort of taught me a lot about it, that actually there isn't really a bad business, a bad idea, a bad market. Generally, as you sort of look at these businesses, and particularly ones like that have grown as rapidly as my two did, is that, it's the systems, the processes, the people architecture that struggle to keep up as you grow. And I think that's a really hard lesson. And without being in there with the battle scars, it's really different to understand that, the founder who got you to 10 million turnover, he's the exact or she's the exact bottleneck that's going to stop you getting to 50. And you don't see it because you're in there and you're in the weeds and you just don't see the problems.
Yeah, no, it's so true. And you and I are in a very similar line of work and in a very similar founder-led business where, not most times, but every time the founder's the problem. But the founder's also a huge resource and asset. And getting that founder in the seat that allows them to be that visionary leader is one of the most empowering processes I go through and have gone through 15 different times with my clients, is seeing that person doing what they're best at and not stressing over the things that they're generally not good at.
Yeah. Don't want to do, but still do them. Yep.
Exactly. And they just don't know any better. They had to, I always say you were the head chef, the head janitor, the head CEO, the maitre d', all of it. And you're good at a few of them. Let's go figure out how to make you good at one or two of them instead of all of them. So let's go back a little bit to the businesses you created previously. And as they, this is a podcast about scaling a business and growth.
Yeah.
It's always fun to look back at your own business and recall or recollect on times that you were the problem. So I don't know if any specific moment comes to mind during the scalability of your early businesses that you were like, well, shit, I am the problem. How did you get there? How did you get to that realization? And what did you do about it? Did someone in the business bring you and have that come to your religious figure meeting with you, or did you get there on your own? So tell us about a time where you were the problem.
I think one thing I did just at the start when I set the businesses up is I did an org chart and I put my name into all the different roles that I could think about up to, 100 people. So you're doing all those different things. And the idea early on was to try and scrub out the ones that I didn't like. I think part of the challenge here is I've definitely been a bottleneck in trying to take control of areas that I wasn't good at. So for example, social media marketing and trying to do that at the same time as you're coming up with the solution, at the same time as you're serving clients. And it's been a disaster when I've done that. And it's something you learn very quickly. If you're at the coalface trying to deliver for a client and you're also trying to do posts and make up graphics and all that sort of thing, really did it and really held up and caused major issues in my business.
Yeah. Well said. I too am not a marketer. But I always feel like for me, it was so hard for me to acknowledge the need for the marketing expense internally for my practice. For my clients' work, I could look them straight in the eyes and say, you're spending 0.5% of revenue on marketing. You're not going to grow. You've got to increase that expense. We got to find the subject matter expert. But when it's time to eat my own dog food and spend my own hard-earned money to grow my own practice, it was complicated because it's like, there's a way I can, outsource this to someone. But the reality is that, I was like, oh, they'll just run it. I won't have to do anything. I'll delegate and elevate my way out of this and they'll run it. But the reality is that you're going to have to provide oversight and commitment and dedication to the message that's going out the door for your practice. And to your point, I'm not the best at building decks, presentations. It's just not what I'm good at. And, getting out of the way of that is a very empowering thing. Well, that's cool. Any other issues that came up operationally or things that you saw during scale that was like, man, and maybe you're looking back on it now and you're like, marketing was definitely not my skill set, but anything else?
I think looking at your business and trying to run it, holding on to the wrong people for too long. So again, as you sort of, the person who can do 3 or 4 roles, maybe in a finance department, as you grow, you need each of those individually. And if you keep that jack of all trades or that person who's a generalist, you generally tie your hands. You also found that when you're so busy running your business, you're maybe not positioning it for sale, acquisition, investment. And that also can be a real problem because when you're churning along, sales are coming in, you're trying to do all those different things. And that's just the time when you want to be able to get the investment to keep growing. You're getting to a point where you plateau and it's really difficult then at that point to try and reposition yourself because the pressure's on and to get yourself restructured so you can get investment to scale to the next level. And again, all those mistakes I've made.
I'm dancing over here in my chair, hearing what you say, and it resonates because that's very similar to what I say, just without a cool accent. What I say to my folks is it's very hard to consciously work on the business while you're working in the business. And the point is you get fixated on delivering a product, a service, a value, whatever. And it's really hard to step out and look at it from the outside and think, how do I build this thing to something that I want it to be, right? What is my vision for it? Where do I want to go with it? And to your point, which hits me right on the head, which is what's the end goal, right? What do you want to do? Is this something that you want to exit? And if you want to exit this business in whatever time period that is, you have to start thinking about that in terms of today, because you know this, having exited companies and working with clients who are also on that journey. When you're ready, it's too late to start preparing. you've already should have been prepared for that time when you're ready to move to the next level or the sale.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. It's a hard thing to see though.
Yeah, I think it's very hard because you do that dance or that balancing act because you need that structure, that discipline, that process to be able to effectively move yourself out of the business as a founder. But that costs money, takes time. That whole adage, I don't know if you know that saying, where you spend an hour to save 5 minutes. So you got to spend that hour over and over and over again to get those 5 minutes back. And setting that process up when you're not yet there, it's really, really hard to do. And you're focusing on keeping the clients happy, getting things delivered, trying to get money in, all these different things.
Well, here's what I can tell you. The title of this podcast is what this episode will be when you spend an hour to save 5 minutes. It's such a poignant point that says, how do we do better about being strategic with our time and process and resource so that we spend 5 minutes to save an hour instead of the other way around? Very, very cool. Okay, I want to go back. You mentioned your father being a figure for you in entrepreneurship. You also mentioned letting the wrong people stay in the right seat for too long. Is there anybody that comes to mind in one of your businesses, you can name he or she or not, where you were able to grow them into that right seat? Meaning they started at one position and they grew for the right reasons into a different seat.
Absolutely. It took a long time. It took a lot of training, but there's a gentleman, I won't name him, but if he listens to this, you'll know who he is. And he worked his way up from being very junior in my business over 11 years. I worked his way up through different roles, got him managing people because he was that concept of being an operator, still with a tool belt. I think you used in one of your previous podcasts, which I listened to, and moved into then managing and training people. And then we had to move him on to the next side to actually then be able to speak and to be able to talk to clients. And, he'd go in there and he'd panic and we'd have an hour meeting where we're trying to find out what the client needed. And he'd speak for 58 minutes. and without a pause, and we're like, we learned nothing. We have no idea what the client wants because you just spoke the whole time. But he moved all the way up to being a partner, ended up leading one of the countries for us, and then moved on to do something completely different. He's moved on into a sports field now, but he was a very, very good leader, very inspirational, and moved that whole way up through the organization.
You still have a relationship with him or friendship with him now?
Yeah. He messaged me last week. So he's doing
That's awesome.
Right. So
That's awesome. No, I think one of the most rewarding pieces of what you and I do for a living is impacting lives positively, right? And just being able to allow people to have that journey. Because I think as a founder and an operator, which we both are, giving people a path to what their goals are is incredibly rewarding.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We did this thing, and I've done this in multiple businesses where we do life coaching. And the idea is, can we actually get you on what it means for you to actually get something better for you as an individual? So the idea there is, I don't want to know what you go through in that session with the life coach. And we do different ones. Sometimes it's 2, 3, 10 sessions. But the idea is you find out why you're working, why you're doing this. You're coming to work for me to earn money. Great. Is that to buy a house? Is that to effectively retire? What is it you're doing this for? What really juices you, gets you going? And that's been a big thing to sort of invest back in. And just last night, I got a text message from one of the guys who went through that program who actually, he did buy a house and he doesn't work for me anymore. And we're going to catch up next week. We haven't seen him for a while. So it's really, that kind of things are really, really exciting.
That's special. Very special. All right. This is one of my favorite topics. And I've had a lot of different answers. So take a minute to think about this. The general theme is delayed decision-making. And delayed decision-making cuts both ways, right? That's all I'm going to say. So I'm going to let you tell me about an example or an instance of delayed decision-making and what the outcome was from delaying that decision. So think about it. I don't know if you have anything that comes to mind, and I'll give you just another few seconds to think about it. But delayed decision-making, any scenarios or targets or things that you're just like, oh shit, that was... I'll leave it to you.
I remember the episode where I heard you talk about this previously. So I think it's a fantastic concept. And I think I've been bitten both ways. We've delayed making a decision to restructure an organization where it actually cost us probably in about year 7 in the big consultancy business. It made us our worst year ever. We made an enormous loss because we didn't restructure because there was some rather big political changes going on around Brexit time, if you remember UK and Brexit.
Oh, absolutely. Sure.
And they couldn't make up their mind which way they were going. And we decided not to restructure and to stay as we were. And it literally wiped out 18 months of cash balances and profits. It was an absolute disaster. But we sort of knew it wasn't going to happen, but we were kind of hoping it would. And so we didn't make that decision. And that was a disaster for the business, really.
You are listening to the Scalability Code. I'm your host, Matt Haney, founder of Sinclair Ventures, and we help visionary entrepreneurs like you get out of the shit show and focus on growing your business. We offer fractional COO and leadership coaching services that free up that brain of yours to focus on what's next. Learn more about us at sinclairventures.com. Now back to it.
And there's probably one the other way as well, where we haven't cut, and we looked at staying in a market, which again, we probably were a bit in inertia, and then ended up landing a big deal, which was fantastic. So it can cut both ways.
Isn't that fascinating though?
Yeah.
It's some of the hardest things to deal with as an operator is you look at these decisions and you're like, man, it's going to go one way or the other and it's going to go fast. Am I making the right one? Is this the right time? Are these the right people? Is this the right subject we should be focused on? Are these the right goals? And it's interesting because it's like you can see both sides of that coin, right? You've seen it. I've seen it. Everyone's seen it. But it's always interesting to hear other entrepreneurs' version of how that coin flips. So that's really cool.
Yeah.
Okay, so a couple other questions that we like to get to. You and I manage people and process for a living. So in the vein of good and bad decisions, tell me your best hire and the attributes that person brought to you guys. And then tell me your worst hire. And you can pick the worst before the better or whatever. But give me an example of folks. And you mentioned it earlier. Maybe it's the same person that you helped grow through that journey, or it's someone different.
No, someone different, actually. He was my CFO for a very long time. He'd definitely been my best hire. He came in and took away, I studied law and I'm an accountant by trade, but I still don't like all that work. I much prefer being out there solving problems for clients and being very much on that sort of side of things. So he came in, just restructured all the back end. He'd come from a business that was probably 15, 20 times the size of what we were. And I felt very lucky that we'd managed to get him to come on board and stayed with him for a very long time until he retired. And he was an absolute gem in terms of anything I could throw at him. There's a contract in Polish. We've got an issue with our office in Hong Kong. We've got Canada. What on earth has gone on with the filing over there? We've got an employment issue in New York. He was able to just come in, sort the whole thing out, and took that whole thing away. And he was, without a shadow of a doubt, best hire and would be. Yeah. So John, if you're listening, you're a superstar, and I hope you're enjoying golf. Every time I see a picture, his beard seems to get longer, and his tan seems to get better, and he's always got a stick of golf clubs in his hand.
Well, the question is he getting to be a better golfer? John, are you getting better, or are you just playing all the time?
Absolutely.
All right, now you got to tell us the bad decisions you made and what those came out to be.
So we looked at hiring and trying to build. So again, when you don't have the prestige of maybe your bigger competitors, so we were coming up against, Bain, McKinsey, Big Four consultancy firms, and we're pitching in that circle with these sort of tier one banks, and we're sort of fighting against them for business. We poached someone to come on board and sort of announced before he'd started that he was joining and all this sort of thing. And it turned into be a disaster because he asked, I guess I can say it's probably not going to get me any legal trouble, but he asked to be paid in a certain way that was outside of the normal way. And then he left before he started. He didn't start, but he was able to keep the sign-on bonus and all that because it had been routed via a different company, which he'd asked to do. And I guess it was one of those things of, again, early lesson of being stung by someone who maybe didn't have the ethics and that we were sort of hoping to have within the organization.
That's a tough one, man. That's a tough one. Spending money and giving someone a bonus and then to sign and they don't show up.
But it was the biggest salary we'd paid to date at that point. So yeah, that was a very painful decision.
A total kick in the teeth, right? Oh man, I'm so sorry to hear that one. That one's tough. All right, as an operator, you and I build people and systems. What are some of your favorite systems you've produced or created? And that could be a software you've implemented, or a cost tracking mechanism you've put in, or a onboarding process.
Yeah. So, well, I put all those in because you have to start building out process and start getting people on board to do that. And when you've got hundreds of employees, you can't manage that obviously on a napkin and so forth.
Sure.
I think probably the best one we have is we put together and it became a beast until itself, was an Excel modeling spreadsheet that enabled us to both model future projects and past projects. And before we had proper accounting systems, and even after we did, we were able to just run very, very quickly numbers. You could go in there and punch in a few numbers and it would model what things look like and give you your best case, your most likely case, your worst case, the case you're tracking, and it would give you all these kind of data and enable you to sort of figure out, okay, if ABC works, this is where we are, and if none of them work, this is where we are. And it really helped us model that really quickly. And as you're pitching for work, we were able to literally sit down and go through that process. I modeled some of that. We built some of that into the main accounting system, but it still exists. It was built in like 15, 20 years ago, and it still runs.
Yeah, that's awesome.
In some form. Yeah.
In some form or fashion.
Exactly.
Well, to follow that, like you build the system and the process, and it's still humming in some capacity today. How are you able to measure that, that success or that efficacy of the process? Can you give us an example of some of the dashboards or metrics or KPI, key performance indicators, data measuring that allowed you and your clients to kind of at a quick instance measure the success of said process or department or whatnot?
Yeah, so that was a people business, just like accounting firms, law firms. So what you're really looking at doing there is trying to assess how billable your staff are. So 80, 90, 100% sort of bill rate have they got, but then also measure it back against clients and target revenue and margins and be able to build that back. So you could slice it by country, by client, by individual person. We could see what sort of money we were making, what sort of margin we were making in all different directions and very quickly. So I think the data that we put into the back end of that was quite substantial and enabled us to make all those decisions and on the fly, which was really good. I think it's being able to see that, I think, as someone, because if you don't know what the money is, where the money's coming in, you end up getting a whole bunch of pressures that come down the track, and you end up making very tactical rather than strategic decisions.
Absolutely. And both of those decisions are important, tactical and strategic. But I think the time to use which versus one versus the other is also a skill that we learn. And I coach a lot of my clients to pick 3 to 5 core metrics that they can measure on a weekly basis to determine the health of the business. And it's easy to go down the rabbit hole and create 76 different metrics that we're all looking at. But the reality is that if you don't have some large scale metrics to measure against, you're going to get lost. And to your point, you start thinking tactically around, our collections are 80% of our collections are 33 days past due instead of, at 30. It's like you just get micro focused. So what are your favorite macro measuring tools that you've seen either in your businesses or other businesses that you'd say, hey, if you could focus on these things, these 3 to 5 or whatever?
We had a thing which again, I think in any business I've been involved in is look at maintainable revenue. So if, for example, if you're doing $500,000 a month, let's just say sales, if you're not generating $500,000 a month going forward, so maybe 400 of that is ongoing and 100 is going to drop off. If you're not able to generate $500,000 and looking forward, you're going to shrink. Now it sounds really, really simple, really obvious, but the number of people who don't look at that and they don't go, hang on a minute. This month we did 400, this month we did 300, this month we did 200. And then you find out in quarter 3, all of a sudden your business is in a terrible state. You got to make redundancies. You got to start doing those things. So that kind of forward looking, if you're not generating more revenue this month than, in new sales and everything, including recurring revenue, you end up in a situation where you get to a point where you fail. I have seen that again in my businesses when I didn't have that, how that quickly gets to that point. I think also putting metrics back onto the teams about what they think they're doing. Sales guys, how many clients should you talk to? How many meetings should you have? Trying to get those things out. And that focus, again, very much on the client side to take care of them and touch points with them regularly. Otherwise, you very quickly disappear. So I think on that side. And then the operations ones they can have their 50 metrics if they want. That's all good. But I think looking at that sort of front end and the top of the funnel and what you're doing at that end, because if you don't have that coming, you don't have a business, you have a charity or you have something else. So you got to get that.
You have a hobby.
Yeah, the hobby. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. One of them that came up this week for me was the importance of customer satisfaction and understanding that we need to be asking our customers what their opinions are of our service. I had a client just this week that had a poor customer satisfaction response to this particular service. And they triggered a lot of interesting things that brought a bigger conversation back to the leadership team, right? And to make a really long story short, some of the issues that this client was upset about are issues that we'd already resolved. But the leadership team and some of the delivery team spun around these issues and kind of really wrapped their head around them and over-rotate on the response. And we as a leadership team said, wait, we've already solved for those. Let's not create a bigger issue when we've already solved for the problem moving forward. We create a better system, a better process. It was all about communication, surprise. But not over-rotating on the metric. But that metric also forced another conversation internally that we could solve for. So customer satisfaction is one that I think maybe it's not a top 5 metric, but I think it's pretty close.
It's pretty high. I mean, Amazon have built a business on it, haven't they? So it's like obsessing about customer happiness. So I think,
Yep. That's awesome. Well, as we sort of come to the end, I do think there's a couple things that I want to ask you a question, and one specifically around, advice. We as advisors and founders and successful business owners receive and give a lot of advice. Take a minute and think about any advice you received over the years that were either simple or profound that impacted you and changed the way you see a certain topic, person, thing, process. Anything come to mind?
When you haven't run a business and you get into a business, you don't realize how much time you spend with lawyers. And whether that's good or bad, you generally get into that point. And I've been very lucky to have had a commercial lawyer for 15, 20 years in London. He's a Canadian and a British chap, and he's fantastic. But he always sits down when we've got an issue or discussing something. And the very first thing he says, how would I argue this from the other side? How would I position it? How would I position myself in this situation from the other side of the argument? Over, the number of disputes that we've had in different situations, it's prompted us to either go, no, you know what, we're not going to settle. We're strong here. They've got nothing. Or, you know what, they could argue it that way. Let's work a settlement and just get it off our list. Get the focus back on the business and just accept that we're going to have to pay something and it's a cost of doing business. So I think that's a really big one, particularly for people who haven't been in business, that the amount of time you spend with lawyers and that idea of just, let's look at the other side of the argument. If I was coming at your business in this situation, or you'd done that to me, how would you see and how would you argue it? I found it to be some of the best advice. And I always now look at that in any kind of situation.
And you know that if you ring him up again, that question's going to be the first one that comes out. So you better have thought of the other side.
Exactly. So, which is great. It's fantastic. Yeah.
That's a really sound piece of advice as you start to defend your case in your mind. How could I be wrong? Well, you could, this is how you could be. He's seeing it from the other side. It's special. I'd love to ask you a personal question, which is, as an entrepreneur and an advisor, how do you, turn off the computer, close the screen, lock the iPhone? What makes you tick outside of work?
Yeah, well, I get pretty excited by any sport, like my American football a lot. And
American football? What kind of an Aussie Brit are you?
For my sins, I became a Packers fan. So
that's funny.
So I was sitting in a bar in New York years ago, and someone said, who's your team? And I said, I don't have a team. And they're like, you got to have a team. And I'm like, okay, I'll take the green team. They look all right. So so for the last 10 years, I could have picked the Jets, which would have been a whole different trajectory.
That would have been a different vibe for sure. That's funny.
And I think just trying to take some time out. I think a few years ago, I was really bad. I was doing 80 hours a week. I was literally all weekends, nights, shutting the laptop at midnight, 1 a.m. But I'm pretty good now at turning off on the weekend. I think that's, just trying to get some time out to do something else. It makes you a lot fresher. And I think I'm probably more productive, which is the irony of that situation.
That's funny. All right. Who do you follow? Both rugby and football. Who are your teams?
Well, I follow Australian rugby. And in football, I'm a Chelsea fan. So that's been a very interesting one. Again, without putting too much dated content into this, it's we're not going through a very good phase at the moment. So
well,
yeah.
I'm a Liverpool fan, and I concur. We're in a very
Yeah.
similar position. We had some very shining moments at time, but now we're on the struggle bus, as my son says. So we'll hopefully grind through it. Well, listen, I really appreciate your time today and cherish the conversation. And I want to say you're the first international guest I've had, and it's been a great
fantastic.
start. And I love that you and I share so many similarities in terms of our experience and our current careers. It's nice to see folks going through the same journey that I'm going through with my business and my clients. So, Christopher Burke, thank you for joining us today on the Scalability Code. I really enjoyed our time, and I hope to have you back soon.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Matt.
Thank you for listening to the Scalability Code. If you made it this far, please follow the show on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. We'll see you next time on the Scalability Code.